At this point, I think it's safe to say that Jon has providing all of us with weekly therapy sessions with the immense library of knowledge he has been sharing with us on the imagination over these last few weeks. I've heard such amazing comments from so many of you, including how he's even been helping therapists understand their patients better. This series has been of so much value to all of you following along, and Jon's playlist has become my personal go-to for survivors who reach out wondering what their first step should be after waking up to their abuse. Relearning about our psychology and physiology is no easy task, and Jon has provided so much helpful education in helping us understand the truth about how trauma affects our bodies and minds, as well as what to expect from your therapist when seeking treatment. I, for one, have gained so much value from this series and understanding my podcast guests better, as well as my partner at home, who is also a survivor. If you've missed the other episodes Jon has done on the imagination, I'll have his playlist in the show notes. He has taught us everything from journaling to learning about systems and parts, understanding triggers and boundaries, and most recently, we began going down the rabbit hole of answering the question, what makes a sexual predator? Where Jon breaks down the psychology of deviant psychopathy. We are so honored to get to learn from Jon, and I ask you all to please put away whatever you're doing and give him your full attention. Before I finish introducing today's guest, I wanted to give just a couple reminders and updates. If you'd like to be on the podcast as a guest or share any information privately with me, you can email me at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com. You can also use this email if you'd like to be a part of my new book series featuring written survivor testimonies, and you can find the video with all the details on how to submit your testimony on any of my podcast channels. And lastly, I'd love your support on my Substack, where I'm taking up investigative journalism as an outlet for me to share about my podcast, guests, and advocacy work. And you can subscribe to me there at www.emmacatherine.substack.com. Thank you all so much for caring so deeply about survivors and whistleblowers, and for helping to make the imagination the safest space on the internet for survivor and whistleblower disclosures. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming back today's guest of honor, selfless man of God, voice for the voiceless, child abuse survivor advocate, podcaster, Satan slayer, pedophile exposer, protector of the vulnerable, and therapeutic warrior, the one, the only, Jon Uhler. Jon, thank you so much for being here again with us this week and today.
Emma, it's a pleasure. So it's good to be with you.
It's awesome. This has really been so valuable. Like I said, I'm shocked every week. Not that I didn't think that this would just do amazing things for people, but actually hearing it, it's so much different than just what I thought in my mind might happen. And some of these people that you're changing, their lives, their minds, Jon, their relationships with their partner, with themselves. I really feel like even though you're teaching us about therapy, I feel like in a weird way, we're also receiving it on the other end and sort of healing together around these conversations, and growing better empathy for each other, learning and considering what somebody might be going through, and really just relearning how amazing our bodies are, how horrifying the world is. But as you always say, that there's always hope, which is always the icing on the cake that you provide. So I'm so grateful for this. This has been awesome for me, both doing my podcast at home and just, my own empathy for people that I come across every day. So I'm really excited to continue this journey. Last week was really cool. We started going down the rabbit hole of predators and perpetrators and sort of the psychology of the psychopathy of that. So I'm excited to venture down that again today and continue that conversation. But first, per usual, I thought we'd answer a question from the audience, if that's okay with you. Those are, we get some really good questions. So I do have a good one that I'm going to bring up. And then right after that, we can go into this awesome new chart that you made for all of us, that sort of breaks down this, really what psychopathy is and what brings somebody to be a perpetrator. So the question that I'm going to ask for you today was left on one of our YouTube channels, and it said, I have a question for Jon. Can this type of therapy be administered to SRA victims by just a regular person who is able to be trained by someone like Jon? Or can it— Great advice, Jon. Thank you so much for answering that. That was a really good question. And again, thank you so much for submitting that. again, like Jon said, it's not meant to be negative. We genuinely want to give you guys the best advice possible and offer you guys multiple different ways to look at a question and the answer to it. So just take Jon's information and, run with it. If you're that passionate, like there's really awesome now that they are starting to talk about some of this stuff on a clinical level, with IFS and different things like that. So it is starting to be incorporated a little bit more, but you also have the added benefit of learning from people like Jon. So
And
awesome.
keep submitting the questions, right? And if you did submit a question we haven't gotten to it, feel free resubmit it because we may have missed it.
Yes,
Sometimes it's tricky to catch all of them on multiple platforms. So
good call. Yes, please submit your questions, write them in the comments. We love that. And we try to start every show with at least one question.
yeah.
Um, so Jon, I'll turn it over to you. I know that you have a continuation of our chat last week about predators. So I will let you kind of kick off or lead on how you want to open up today's dialogue around that.
Okay, well, again, it's good, Emma, that we're doing this. And the rationale, again, it probably is, this may be a little surprising to people, especially survivors. As a matter of fact, one of my clients who has been following us on your program, on your podcast, Emma, when I mentioned what we were going to start to be looking at, we're going to start looking at, her initial reaction, bless her heart, was, "Oh, why? Why are you going to? I can't." I mean, she didn't feel she'd be able to watch it because all of a sudden we're going to talk about perps and predators. And so I encouraged her. I said, "Well, here's the reason why. First of all, is it a little? Can it be a little hard to all of a sudden stop midstream or just when we're starting to get underway? Because we are, and we'll pick back up on the parts chart. So, no one has to fear that we will leave them hanging. We have a lot of hours to cover with that. But I felt it's important at some point in time, and it seemed like the right time to add this piece, which is helping someone understand, because this is inevitably under the surface for anyone, let alone a survivor. Question is, who's responsible for what? What am I responsible for? But even more than that, with SRA, the person or people that did this to me, to what extent do they bear responsibility? To what extent did they know? To what extent could they have done something other than what they did? To what extent did they really care? Because inevitably there's going to be the double bind, the catch-22, the mixed messages. And so that's where you get parts that are aligned with, right? The little soldier, in a way, literally and figuratively. Those parts that want to be dutiful, those parts that feel like they were commended, they did a good job. Okay. But then that same person or group of people also did what? They were torturing that person. So that creates a very difficult situation how to reconcile that, because then the same person that is damaging me is the same person that's rewarding me. As a matter of fact, that should sound familiar, kind of like the domestic violence cycle. And it's not until, so that's why these principles really run the game, are applicable in any situation. So the more I can see the truth, more the truth will set me free. And one of the key issues ultimately is what happened, who did this, and who ultimately is responsible. And was there something I did that has to do with responsibility? And what is the nature of the person? Because they gave mixed messages. So under their surface, in their heart of hearts, who were they? If you can figure that out, we're going to show you. That's why we're doing this chart. But if you can figure that out, I'll tell you what, it'll speed the healing process up, because then way down deep inside, it's going to clarify for those that still feel like they need to be loyal, the little parts. The loyalty will suddenly start to drop off. And suddenly they're not going to be aligned with the aggressor. Suddenly they're not going to be so inclined as to start harming the body. or still obeying, or even possibly killing the body. Because who told them to do that? The person, the people. But if you found out that the reason why they wanted you to kill the body is so they didn't go to prison, now it changes things. Now maybe you don't have to because they tricked you, they fooled you, they did a bait and switch. Maybe you don't need to comply. As a matter of fact, once your eyes are open, then you can really take steps that are in your best interest finally. That's why we're doing this. So in the midst of looking at the parts, looking at the interaction with the parts, and before we get to the middle section of parts, that sounds funny, huh? But the layer of parts that are the most protective and the most conflicted and will be the ones to pursue and be successful with suicide, the ones that will hurt the body, the ones that will sabotage success, the ones that will keep memories from coming up, are the ones that need to hear this the most so that they can be clear on who was it that was talking to them, who was it that was telling them the different things that they whispered in the ear over and over and over until it feels like programming. Once you can see this, the programs will fall away, or it'll be much easier because then you can assess not just what they told you. And again, when I use the term program, my working definition of it is you were really persuaded. Somebody repeated something enough and they convinced you of something to where you've become persuaded. Not because you're not smart, but that's kids will believe things. Especially in certain ages, they believe Santa Claus can fly. We could say they're programmed to believe in Santa Claus. Okay, for a time. And that's why you can't talk them out of it. Even though, this is the fifth Santa Claus we've seen today in the mall, and the kids thinks it's Santa Claus every single time. Or you live in an apartment with no chimney, but Santa Claus is going to come down the chimney. So we got to make cookies and milk. So despite the facts, doesn't matter. I'm going to do it. Why? Because Santa Claus come down the chimney. Okay, so that's how deep this stuff goes, and the age at which a lot of this was done. So once those parts within the survivor can begin to understand, and it's not just applicable for survivors, once we can understand the nature of the people that did this, then you'll have a choice to decide to what extent are they owed your obedience, and do they deserve your loyalty? If you come from a bloodline family, okay? The occult, Satan deals in things like that. God doesn't, by the way. I want people to know that. God doesn't care what bloodline you came from. We all came from the family tree of Adam and Eve. That's all. That's important to know because that's how God sees us. Okay. And that's what was taken care of when Jesus died on the cross. That separation between me and God. Satan is into numbers, he's into bloodlines, he's into all of that stuff because he's very tricky and he's persuasive and he wants people to give him more power than he actually has. Satan is a finite being. He's one of three archangels. Most people don't think of Michael the archangel as being omniscient, omnipotent, be able to speak things with words. How about Gabriel? Gabriel and Michael. Nobody will do, but all of a sudden when it comes to Lucifer, I think, oh, he has so much power. He has no more power than Michael and Gabriel. Okay, now I'm not minimizing his power. Okay, so all that to say, we are now looking at, we're going to take a little, what we're doing is we're developing a series within a series now, which will help us as we get to on the parts chart. It'll help those parts that are still aligned. Because then the survivor or the therapist that's helping the survivor can maybe harken back to the series we're doing now, this chart that I'm gonna bring up now. And they can say, remember Jon's chart. Remember what, based upon the characteristics and character qualities, as I bring it up, where would you put Mr. So and so? Where would you put the big hairy man? Where would you put the guy with the dark robe? What did he do? What was he like? And so, was he misguided? Did he care about you? Or was he actually always tricking you because he wanted to? That's going to help, because those that are really protective, the ones way down deep inside, the firefighters, as IFS calls them, those that are there to gatekeep. Right now, they still are persuaded on some level those people, in a strange sort of way, cared or could be trusted. The words that came out of their mouth, such as nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Okay, were they right? So we're going to find out. And I pushed wrong, but hold on. There we go. So, Emma, any questions with that? Not that you
No,
have to.
thank you so much for covering this. It's so important. Like you said, it goes perfect with everything that we've been talking about. Oh,
Okay.
we did add on to this. Look at that.
We did add, and by the time I'm finished, it'll probably be twice as long. So people have to keep tuning in because
Yes.
it's an ongoing developing thing. This is really forcing me, allowing me to just finally put down um, things that I've learned over the years. Okay, so what we're looking at here, everything is very small. I will zoom in. I just want you to see the size of the chart thus far. Is we're looking at really how to make a psychopath, or the process and progression of someone becoming the kind of person that can hurt other people, that can move into psychopathy down here. And you'll notice I changed things, not for changing's sake, but these are actual different sections. And so I'm going to begin to move them around, not to lose my audience, but really to make sure they fit. And so if you look at right here, the degree of complex trauma and degree of the perpetrator's deviant sexual drive, it's on a gradation. All of this is on a scale of 1 to 10. So the question is, when someone gets to a point where they can do dark things, or the complex trauma, then also, this is really the degree of negative impact. When somebody can do this kind of thing, the really severe stuff, what kind of person are they? How did they get to that point? So that's what we're looking at. I'm now going to increase this, and I'll give you an overview thus far, but we'll still be adding to it. And let me, okay, increase it. I'm going to click this little zoom thing. Everybody watch your eyes. Okay, there we go. I'm going to go up. So I don't want anybody to get seasick or motion sickness. Close your eyes just for a moment. We're going to go up. Okay, so what we have, as we had, let's see this. Okay. So what we have on the top, and these two didn't change, the rest changed based kind of, I moved things around a little bit. Okay, so what we're going to look at, we're going to pick up where we left off last time, but again, just a brief overview as far as these categories. So we have a degree or a progression of violation of conscience into a permanent reprobate condition. Reprobate is a mental urgy term, meaning it's no longer good for its intended purpose. So the mind that ends up down here is different than the brain, different than IQ. The mind is how we process and really our values and what we value and what we think about and self-reflection. The mind that becomes reprobate is one that is no longer good for its intended purpose. So if I didn't add it on this one, but we eventually I'll have a scale of 1 to 10, really -1 to -10 from left to right. Where we want to be, ideally, is way over to the left of the chart. We'll say that is normal. If someone gets off the straight and narrow, which would be over here, if you can see my little cursor over here, and you cross somebody's boundaries, you're now starting to go downhill. So progression, or the progression, will move from left to right on this chart. So what we have here, different aspects, different constructs within someone. So we're going to see a violation of conscience that's going to progress. All of this is going to match. There's going to be a correlation between what's going on the inside and eventually what comes out. And we'll look at this. This has to do with kind of the most typical types of things perpetrators are charged with and the chunks of time they're given in prison. The degrees of malice and forethought. We have the perpetrator's goals. So again, what are the degrees of malice? Kind of hatred, what drives them, and how much forethought, how much thought did they put into it? And we're ultimately looking at capacity. To what extent were they capable? And that's what the law looks at. We have the perpetrator's goals. Everybody is goal oriented, whether they know it or not. Even someone who procrastinates, right? Procrastination is not laziness, it is actually rooted in fear. And that's why somebody's putting something off. So everything we do for a reason, whether we can figure it out or not. Categories of pornography. This is crucial to understand. We will look at that. We looked at it a little bit last time because in all of sexology, first like that, they'll never reference pornography. They'll never talk about what pornography does to somebody. In sex offender treatment and sex offender research, rare is a time that they will look at the categories of pornography. It's almost inevitably you will find that depending upon how far someone has gone in terms of crimes, you will find they're into that kind of pornography. We're going to look at deviant arousal. We looked at the word deviant. We'll look at it again, but deviant arousal, motivation, degrees of intentional harm. Now, we might say, well, goal and motivation, that's fairly similar. Yep. But this is what drives someone toward the desired end. And it's not a good desire, but that's the difference there. And degree of intentional harm. Now, we might say, well, wait a second. Intentional harm and forethought. Very similar. And that's why we're kind of, I'll use the idea of taking a ham and cooking a ham. You slice it. We're going to, like you go to a deli, and if you want the really thin kind that you make a normal sandwich with, right, we're going to slice it thinly. Sorry for using that word in a way, but it's just a lot to it. As a matter of fact, these are the different things that I look for when I'm doing a sex offender assessment or a report for parole. When I was in the prison system, the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, again, I was there for 11 years, served on psych staff, did specialized assessments. I'm trained in the Harris Psychopathy checklist, the PCLR. So when I'm doing my specialized evaluations, these are the things that are going through my mind, okay, that people need to look for. The average sex offender assessment does not include all of these. So it's very important. Why? In my role, I need to ensure public safety. The guy's already out. As far as what I'm doing now, I'm one of South Carolina's largest providers of what's called community-based treatment, guys that are mandated once they get out of prison. As a matter of fact, just a few hours ago, I was doing one of my weekly treatment groups. Okay, so we're also going to look at the continuum of sexual objectification, predation, and perpetration. We're then going to continue to look at degrees of complex trauma. I'm probably going to be filling these in as we go, by the way. Deviant sexual drive, as a matter of fact, I will be filling these in. These will be important. This is new, and we'll go over this. Degrees of intensity, as far as what I should say, internal intensity within the perpetrator, and then premeditation. Very similar, right? We could say they're synonymous, premeditation and forethought. In my mind, a little bit different. I'll go into that. And then we looked at purpose and intent. The reason this is important, but again, and I'll probably be filling more in on this as we go. So stay tuned, right? Because from week to week, we're going to be adding more to this just because it's really important to see how many different facets, like a diamond has little sides, those little facets. It's really important to understand that by the time somebody gets to the far right, look what they're capable of doing. So if those of you that have been through SRA, you were abused by somebody or people, right? It's usually what's the difference between individual perpetration, SRA, and MK Ultra, typically the amount of people, right? It inevitably means there are more than one person. Okay. So ritualistic abuse versus SRA. So that's always going to deal with groups of perpetrators. It's important to understand all of them, not the ones that were triggered and forced then to participate. Okay. The ones that were leading this thing, the ones that are keeping this thing going, the ones that that come to mind, right? The ones that were spearheading this, they were over on the far right. And that's what all the parts on the inside of you need to know. Because there are some parts, there's the degrees of psychopathy and, psychopathy down the bottom, sociopathy. Again, the difference really, best way to understand it is sales versus driven to harm. Okay. A psychopath gets off on harming people, a sociopath gets off on gaining stuff. Big difference. But the reason the overlap is to be a psychopath that's not going to be arrested sooner rather than later, you have to be really good at impression management. You have to be good at grooming and working people. So you take the skills of the best sociopath, but you keep going with ego, and it's getting bigger and it's getting more evil. So the smooth operator is a sociopath and the evil person. So the difference between the psychopath that gets busted sooner rather than later versus the one that goes into politics, into positions of power, is the ability to have finesse, the ability to work the crowd, the ability to strategize. They are I need to add the chess master, right? A book that the sociopath is going to read the business sales books, business psychology. Psychopath is going to read the art of war. Okay, they're going to it's strategy. Psychopath is into strategy. Sociopathy, a sociopath is into closing the deal. So hopefully that makes sense. So for those of you that are the victims of SRA or MK Ultra, what I want you to understand, and here we go. I'm going to, because I got this on a PDF, this is good. So I can bring up a little magic marker kind of stuff. Okay, so I'm going to draw. And what color are we going to have here?
You can see the edits in real time once again.
Here we go. This is real, right? There's no chance for error. Of course, there's a chance for error, but right, if people are gonna be able to see if we know what we're talking about. Okay, so did I make that wide enough? Yes, I did. Okay, so for those of you that were abused by perps that did SRA, you were abused by people and MK Ultra that were to the right of this line. And we can take it all the way up. Okay. You need to understand that. So all the parts on the inside, if I can speak to those parts right now, just out of consideration, I want everybody to think through this. Okay. Regardless of what they said, regardless of what they promised you, regardless of the times that they said you were obedient, you did a good job, I want you to understand that they were lying to you because people over on the far right never tell the truth. Now, you can take a turd and put sparkles on it. Okay, sorry. You can have a facade that looks good. How about the idea of the lemon law, buying a car, where you sell someone, it has nice paint, you've airbrushed it, but the engine is shot. So you have been deceptive. So a salesperson, think about the sociopath down here. The sociopath will say whatever they need to say in order to close the deal. The psychopath will say whatever they need to say in order, right? Meaning they're going to use the skills of being a sociopath toward the end of causing harm. That's what they get off on, and then ensuring they never go to prison. Well, how are they going to ensure they never go to prison? They're either going to kill someone, right? You saw that, or they're going to make it so you can't figure it out. Figure out what? Ultimately, that they were never going to do anything other than what they were going to do, and they intended to do exactly what they did. Whether you were there or not, they were going to do that to another kid, and they're going to trick you. And so they're going to play mind games on you because they thought that you were stupid, but you're not stupid. So any part that still feels, quote unquote, trauma bonded, those parts, especially the little soldiers, those parts that are loyal, you need to see. If it was over on the left side, we could understand that. We'll work with that. Okay. But nobody perpetrates SRA or MK Ultra that's not to the right of this line. So people to the right of this line do not deserve any obedience, do not deserve any loyalty. They deserve prison time and death. Now, hold on. For our purposes, they deserve prison time. Well, how are we ever going? Well, for some of you, once you go through your healing, okay, now I'm going to get out of this. Sorry, I'm going to move this up so everybody watch your eyes for a second. I don't want, oh, look at that. How did I do that? That's pretty good. It went all the way up. That's good. That line on the right. There we go. So I would love to see survivors, but those that I work with, by the way, I don't have any agenda as far as now, what would I really like for them at the end, other than to finally have a life? Okay, but would I love to see a survivor be able to see their perpetrator behind bars? Absolutely. Would I love for them to get to a point where they can confront out of their healing rather than their hurt? That's the goal, by the way, in one way or another. Now, it doesn't mean you have to specifically confront, but you can write an unsent letter. We'll describe that at some point in time. Okay, but you're free of them. And then you're free to choose what you want to do versus what you don't want to do. And if any of you would like to pursue criminal charges against your perps, I would love to see that. But the only way you're going to be able to get to that point is once you see every person that was a part of that group, including those that were facilitating it, those that dropped you off, those that left you in the care of those people. It's hard to think through because that might be a mother, that might be a dad, usually a mother. The question is, where on this chart do they lie? Now, we also might have, well, multi-generational. My mom went through that. Okay, we understand that. But at some point in time, because right, she's responsible in this sense that we're talking, you were her child. And at what point in time was she ever going to protect you? Ultimately, and this is just to help with processing, by the way. Okay. At what point in time was she going to care more about you than herself? Right? What happens? The idea that I don't even care. I don't care if this kills me. I'm going to protect my child. Because if part of her was still tied into seeing the perpetrators, in the best case scenario, meaning the least knapsack. Remember that? The least amount of weight that was put on you. Responsibility would be that they were still tapping into small parts of her, but still at some point in time, we got to say the buck stops here. And even with a mother that was still handing the child over to these perpetrators, your mother was an enabler, and we can have sympathy on a small part, but you have to place responsibility where it belongs. And all things being equal, she should do prison time. So, okay, just ponder that. Okay, so I'm back up at the top of this chart. We're going to work our way down. As we talked about last time, and where we sort of left off was this. The red dotted line is the line that separates legal from illegal, meaning to the left of this red dotted line, those are legal acts. Those are things that don't cross legal lines. Now, they're certainly immoral once we start to get into, let's see, categories of pornography, as we talked about last time. We spent time looking at unethical versus immoral. I recommend go back and watch the last chart. But all things being equal, you can do unethical things that doesn't make you immoral, but then you can do immoral things that don't cross legal lines. All of this then really from this point over, all of this is immorality. Okay. But not all immorality is illegal. But you'll reach a point where somebody is doing immoral things that it becomes illegal. And that's why I put probation. The reason why I added probation here is that means the law has got involved. Law enforcement, you've been arrested. Somebody's been arrested. Okay. Now, a judge will decide, is there going to be jail time or probation? So somebody who's been arrested does not have to be sent to jail. The difference, by the way, I think I mentioned this before, but the difference between county jail and I didn't write prison time. Maybe I did before. I'll have to add that. Okay, so this is county jail. This is state prison. The difference is the length of time, by the way. So county jail, I'm assuming this is the case all across the U.S. The context I come from is Pennsylvania, but same thing in South Carolina though. So I think this is probably true almost in every state. That the term jail versus prison, so I should have written prison up there, okay, right about here. The difference is the length of time. So the demarcation point is 2 years. Why? Because county jail only has so much space. So if anybody's going to spend longer than 2 years in jail, right, behind bars, they're going to be sent, quote unquote, upstate. And so now they will be in prison in this green box. And then the question is, how much time are they going to be given? The least amount of time for state prison, by the way, is 2 years. Why? Because anything under that is going to be jail time. There will be different kinds of increments in here. I have guys, for instance, in my groups right now that never did any jail time. They got arrested, they went and posted bail or bond, one of the same, I think. Or maybe bond, that's a good question. I'll figure out the difference between bail and bond. Sometimes it's bail bond, right? But they were able to put up money right away. They didn't have to stay the night in jail. Some spent a couple of nights so that they could persuade family to bail them out, and then they get to come out until they see the judge. Some end up either they're not able to come up with the money, or they're denied bail, and so they have to sit their rear end in county jail. I've got 3 guys that were in my group, but because they were found with secondary cell phones and porn on it, guess where they went? So, and these were guys that I thought were doing pretty well. So, word to the wise, if I still get fooled, and I've been doing this for 15 years, this shows you how good, the more the person moves from left to right, how they are masters of impression management. Okay, so they become more and more professional grade liars and deceivers, and they're really good at it. Okay, so I have a couple guys right now, they're sitting in county jail. They were in prison, they got out. Actually, one got out, he did a fair bit of time, and he was an idiot. And so he's got a phone. Fortunately, he wasn't talking to any minors, but he was doing stuff, and now he's sitting his rear end in county jail. He'll probably come back out. He's then going to be on probation. Sometimes that doesn't extend probation. Strange thing. I'm still not totally sure why, but anyways. Then I have a guy that didn't spend any time in jail, got busted again, spent a couple days in jail. As a matter of fact, he used to be a corrections officer, and he was busted for what? Yeah, positions of power, authority, and trust. Right? You'll find that's why a lot of pastors are false, meaning a lot of perps love going to church. Okay, where are you going to find the people that do these kinds of things? You're going to find them a lot in positions where they are mandated reporters, which means they spend a lot of time. They have consistent access, frequent access to minors, and they are a mandated reporter. And that's anybody from a teacher to mental health to a physician or in the medical profession, a lawyer. What am I forgetting? Clergy, daycare, of course, but education, right? Those are people that are mandated reporters, meaning if they suspect abuse, they don't have to prove it. But for instance, with me and my license, if I suspect that someone is being abused or suspect that somebody is abusing, I am mandated, I am required by law. I don't have a choice. And then you'll call a certain 800 number. Every state calls it different. In Pennsylvania, they called it child line. So you call, somebody answers the phone, by the way, and you just give them the information they will ask. It's typically the name of the child, the age, the location, and they want then the details because they're going to need to find out, does somebody need to come in right away because the child is in imminent danger, or can it wait? And then from there, it goes to depending, but it'll go to the police and it goes to Department of Children and Family Services, Child Protective Services, Children and Youth, all the same thing, really. Um, and potentially then the child is removed from the home. That's very traumatizing, but some of you actually went through that. Uh, Theoretically, in child welfare, they are to try to utilize the least confining type of environment. I'm forgetting the term right now, right? But they want to not so much the least restrictive. Yeah, that's probably it, huh? But they want to. Now, this is ideally, okay. This is in child welfare. That ideally, if a child can be kept in the home, they'll try to keep the child in the home. But we all know about CPS and different things. But I can tell you that not every CPS worker is part of the system, meaning is not that they are into snatching kids. Okay, I can tell you that because I was the acting director for Children and Youth. That's the Department of Children and Family Services for a year in Cambria County in Western Pennsylvania. I was trying to revamp things. They said they wanted change, and I was trying to make things a little more user friendly for parents. Can I see how a Department of Children and Family Services in child protection, can I see how they would be used to traffic kids? 100%. What was going on in Dayton, Ohio, I believe, a pastor and an assistant pastor who were no pastors. They were trafficking kids, and the guy's wife, the pastor's wife, was head of Department of Children and Family Services. And then also one of the county commissioners uh, or supervisors. They were all working together. So there you have trafficking. But I'm not willing to say that every single county throughout the U.S. is um, is able to work it because, by the way, a social worker cannot take a child, cannot come into your home without a court order. By the way, you need to know that. So, a social worker shows up. You have the right. Let's say she wants to come inside your home. So there's been somewhat of a report. You do not have to let them in. She has to have a court order. She has to show you. Typically, she's going to show up with a police officer. Okay, then you know it's the real deal. If you don't let them in, then you're going to be arrested. Okay, but it takes a court order. So no social worker can take your child without a court order. What happens behind the scenes in the Department of Children and Family Services, Children and Youth, DFSS, CPS, all that kind of, they use different terms. Okay. Now, first of all, every state is mandated to have one of these agencies. Part of it is a good idea. Now, before I lose my entire audience, I'll tell you why. Okay. Theoretically, why is that necessary? Where did this idea come from? Well, I'll tell you where it came from. To the extent that communities got away from, shall we say, churches, I'll just use that term generically. It used to be in most towns, the same thing in most countries, but think about the United States. So I'll just reflect what happens here in the US. So as little towns got settled, most of the towns would have a church, would have a gathering place. Sometimes they would have a circuit riding preacher, right? So Methodists, John and Charles Wesley were circuit riders. Uh, well, that's where a lot of the civic activity would take place, voting for the town mayor and things, right? That's how the townspeople would be informed. So the church was also used as a schoolhouse. Well, what would happen if there was a dad or a stepdad that starts beating the wife? Say that's not beating his wife or beating the kids or perping on the kids. What do you do? Well, ideally, the men of the church assemble and they go and have a little chat. Whether they give them the right hand of fellowship. Okay, string them up. Okay, there was accountability, but to the extent that the church became of less influence, it decreased in influence. People paid it no mind, which means there wasn't the connection. of people in a town. I didn't intend to talk about this, but hopefully this will be helpful because there's enough actual conspiracies out there, right? Meaning that just means people are working together. That the more we can demystify things, I think it'll be helpful. Okay, because we want to be fact based. And here I'm aware. I'm staring at this chart, and I'm over here in the little square here. But this will be good information because we're talking about criminal justice here for a moment. Okay. To the extent that the church and community, that community withdrew its influence, then there's a vacuum. And the question is, what do you do in those scenarios where there is neglect or there is abuse? You either have to take matters into your own hands, or what do you do if you know a child is being harmed? Well, fortunately, we can call the police. So let's say you hear out your window a child being abused. You're going to either have to stop it. That's partly recommended, but aren't we glad we can call the police? Hopefully, those police are legitimate. Okay, so that we can, or let's say you're teaching and you suspect this child is being abused. Do you want the child to go back home? No. So you do want a means of protecting a child. So every state, really, money's flow because it costs a lot of money. And there is a theory, I understand it, but I want to correct this, by the way, that CPS is a way of making money. I understand it. Part of me can kind of conceptualize it, but I want to tell you the truth, the reality. I'm going to lose. It doesn't matter. I'm just here to tell you the truth because I sat in one of those chairs. Okay. It's a drain. Okay. It's not money. It's not profit. Now, the private providers can profit. That's a different thing. And I'm well aware, right? There's a situation in Pennsylvania where a judge, as a matter of fact, a couple judges and a provider, 100% agree. Okay, but prisons and child welfare is just an absolute drain on a state budget. Okay, nobody benefits. So, in order to decrease the budget, what they try to do and to help the impact on a kid, ideally, if a child can remain in the home, then they'll bring quote unquote home based services. They'll bring a therapist in, they'll bring a treatment support person in, they'll bring a parenting person in, a lot of different private providers. Okay, so hopefully we don't have to take the kid out of the home. But if it's not safe for the child to be in the home, the next level would be kinship care. Is there a relative? Is there a grandparent? Is there an aunt or uncle to take this child in? If that's not available, then the next best thing is going to be a foster home. And again, I want everybody to hear I understand. I really understand because horrific things happen in foster homes. So many people are abused. Okay. But I just want to lay out just conceptually how this has all come about as far as the foster care system and then juvenile justice and then what we're going to be looking at. And then if a child blows out of one foster home, they'll usually be placed two, three, four times. Oftentimes, by that time, either they're going to be brought back home. Hopefully, things have gotten better, but oftentimes the child may be getting worse, very much likely perped on. But let's say their behaviorally is getting worse to where the child can't stay in a group home. I'm sorry, in a regular foster home, because let's say their behavior is getting too much. Again, I'm not faulting the child, but if their behavior is getting too much, if the foster parents can't handle it, aren't equipped to handle it, then the child will possibly be sent to a therapeutic foster home. Those are specially trained foster parents. From there, if the child still can't be maintained because they'll go to a community-based school, a school in the community, the next level will be a group home. In a group home, then now you have paid staff. And they'll still go to a community-based school in that case. And if that unwinds, if a child blows out of that, and again, I'm not faulting kids, I'm just helping. This will hopefully set the stage for what goes on in systems. And from there, if a child cannot be contained, and usually it's still social services by this time, Kids that have broken the law will go to juvenile justice places. There are two funding streams and two lines of authority that will be brought to bear if a child goes into the system. One is child welfare system, the other is juvenile justice. If a child has to be placed, depending upon case management, the money is all that. Somebody might say, Jon, you just said that this is not money making. When it comes to trying to provide care, a state budget is not enhancing the state budget. Okay, so everybody will benefit if a child doesn't have to be placed into care. And I'm sorry, my cursor, I'm going up. This doesn't mean prison time. Okay, and then eventually, if a child can't be maintained in even an intensive treatment group home, I myself started an intensive treatment group home, a 12-bed adolescent female group home called Tamarack Adolescent Treatment Family Services. That was in northern Cambria County. Then if it's for psych purposes, they may have to go to a psych hospital if it's mental health. But if once stabilized, if they can't be in a group home, then they'll be sent to a residential treatment facility. Usually that is synonymous with psychiatric. And that will be a facility that is built around a school, and it's usually a non-public school, so private school. Now, does abuse take place? More times than not. The facility that I was at, Helicon, it got shut down because of the abuse. And the stuff that I saw, I spoke up against. And a lot of the staff either were ill-equipped, and a lot of these facilities, by the way, are understaffed. And therefore, even some of the best staff get frustrated because some of these kids, especially the boys, well, even some of the girls, by the time you're dealing with teenagers that have been deeply wounded, trauma-based, let's say some of them have parts. And when the aggressive parts come out, because if you're a staff and you don't know how to deal with these kids, what happens? You're going to have a lot of intensity, and then you have these stupid restraints. But I'm so against restraints. If a restraint needs to happen, it needs to be done very, very carefully, and that's where a lot of abuse happens. I may have lost half my audience. I don't want to lose you all. I'm just trying to educate you and how this whole system works. Okay. Can perpetrators hide what they're doing along the way? Absolutely. And that's why those of you who are thinking about, if you're listening to this, you're thinking about going into the counseling field, just know there's a lot of different avenues. You need to be mindful if you want to work with youth that those youth that are mandated, that they have to, dealing with very wounded and damaged kids, likely been perped on prior to coming into the system. That's why they were in certainly abuse or neglect. And once they got into the system. So you are going in there hopefully to help, but just know that the kids you're going to be working with don't want to have anything to do with you. So just be prepared. So if you need to be liked by the young people, right, you earn their trust, but at first they're going to test you. So bless their heart, they've been through a lot. Now, let's take the perpetrators. Going back to this, as far as those that are in jail, let's take, as a matter of fact, that juvenile justice young person. Let's take a teen let's take a kid that was perped on. We had child on child perpetration. And sorry, I'm aware you all are staring at this, but this is important information. So we've heard of child on child, and the question is, does that ever end up being the sophisticated perpetrator over on the right-hand side? No. But I'll tell you, I'll contradict myself. I'll tell you the only time a little bit, but I'm going to describe that real soon. Okay, but the kind that does SRA or MK Ultra, I want everybody to understand this. They were not perped on as kids. Now, let me qualify it again. The ones you're thinking of now that were leading this stuff, the sophisticated perps, they were not sexually abused. How can I say that? Because survivors become protective, not exploitive. That's different than a part being triggered and a little part coming out and harming. But for those of you that come from multi-generational incest, let's say, I'm going to use, again, Murray Bowen, extended family systems. Now, that's different than internal family system. IFS really took the title and played off of it. So Murray Bowen is the author of Extended Family Systems Therapy. As a matter of fact, I'll get out of this just so you're not having to stare at me. I mean, you can come on or not, don't worry. I'll talk to the camera here. I'm going to stop sharing because I'm aware people may not want to stare at that graphic. Okay,
Sure.
but what's important to understand is this. And again, I think I've referenced extended family systems therapy previously. The goal is ultimately to heal and be emotionally whole, which means you'll be able to be emotionally present, fully emotionally present in the moment. If you have unfinished business, as it were, if you've been harmed, you will be at high risk of passing that along. So hurt people in that sense. You'll be reactive. But ultimately, as a matter of fact, I will bring up a chart. We've seen it in the past, but I'm going to bring this up right now. If am I looking at the right one? No, I'm sorry. Bear with me. This is live, right? Um, so this will be helpful as far as context. I think this is the one. Let me bring this up. If not, no, you know what? As we're talking, I'll still be trying to concentrate here and talk at the same time. Okay, so Murray Bowen said this, that unless somebody works hard to become emotionally differentiated, meaning a complete self, have their own sense of self, then they will pass along from one generation to the next. Their level of differentiation and really less than. Okay, now what does that look like? That looks like multi-generational stuff that survivors talk about. Because oftentimes now people are asking, well, Jon, what about the bloodlines and from one generation to the next? What Murray Bowen would say is this. I'm going to kind of use him he would say this. First of all, the buck has to stop somewhere. And what you're doing now is you're saying the buck stops here. I'm not going to I'm not going to perpetrate on my child. Okay? You're doing the right thing. Therefore, your child will be able to be about the business of developing the way he or she is supposed to. Emotionally, they will be able to be more mature. They'll be healed. They'll be at a higher level of maturity as far as being less reactive. Remember the term emotional reactivity. Okay, so they'll have an easier time because you're doing the hard work. If you didn't, what would happen to them? Okay, and how functional would they be? How reactive would they be? They would actually be more reactive than you in one way or the other. So it would go from one generation to the next. Biblically, we say the sins of the fathers are passed along to the third and fourth generation. Murray Bowen would always talk to the person, but he would do a family tree. Look at their parents and then the grandparents. So whether SRA or not, looking at the dynamics going on and to what extent there was triangulation. So somebody got emotionally fused with another person. So the goal was to get them unfused, meaning to help them work through traumatic bonding, so to speak, that term, what we would use. So they have to work through giving knapsacks back. With SRA, it's all the more difficult because then people perped on kids, then they lied and they tricked them. That common term, programmed. Okay, but in a way, the process is still the same. So it's important to understand a couple of the key factors. Now, let me see where we are. As a matter of fact, is the screen changing? Emma, can you see this? As a matter of fact, let me bear with me, everyone.
It didn't change if you
Okay,
were
there
trying
we go. Now it's going to
change it.
change.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
now it's going to change. So that's the biblical stages, by the way. The perpetrators that we're talking about, I hadn't thought about showing this one, maybe I did previously, is we're talking about those in the category of the fool. The fool doesn't mean a joker or someone that can't quite figure it out. Biblically, the last portion of the book of Proverbs, also the same thing in the book of Psalms. Whenever you see the word fool, a 3,000-year-old term, modern psychology comes along, we will call that a psychopath. Okay, it's very different, and look how God feels about them. Again, I think I may have mentioned in the past, if you want to see how God feels about each person that's going downhill, that's doing that, that's the way to read this. So there is a point beyond which there is no return, and that's really the realm of psychopathy. So what I wanted to help someone understand then, as they're going downhill, Okay, when we're going to look at psychopathy, and we're going to look at, I'm going to go back to our chart that we started with, but what we're really going to look at is psychopathy really gets underway on this chart between -3 and -4. Or that's when now, according to, let me redefine that, meaning psychopathy starts with narcissism. So by the time you're dealing with somebody in the pig zone, you don't know to what extent the narcissism has morphed into or given rise to sociopathy and then psychopathy. So the important thing to know is there's a certain point beyond which the person, in this case, it's the person without any knapsacks, by the way, the selfish person in their heart of hearts may already be down here, but the selfish person is pulling the wool over this person's eyes. And this will be important for the little parts on the inside. This is the reason why I brought this chart up, by the way. You know, the firefighters, according to IFS, they are all here. They're carrying responsibility that was not theirs. The perps were over here. The little firefighters, the soldiers, those that will persecute on the inside, those that are inclined to tell another little part, why don't you go hang yourself, just shoot yourself, stab yourself in the hand, pour boiling, scalding hot water on yourself, okay? One little part is telling another, in fact, Frank Anderson uses the term, they have burdens and they need to unburden themselves. Very interesting, okay? So the goal of therapy then is really to allow this person to see the truth about this person. So the chart that we're looking at, the goal is to help you understand this person, because there were times as the perp that was doing SRA or MK Ultra, they every now and then, ready, would act like this person, a super loving, nice person who would give you good things and would say you're special and you're so bright and you are one of their most trusted individuals and you were chosen because you were special. Well, who's going to say that to a kid? Only seemingly this kind of person. That's why perps, by the way, love to go to church, because church is filled with these kind of people who are naive. Okay, so the crazy making comes from somebody who, the person's harming you. And just like the domestic violence cycle, right? The person abuses at this level, beats the hell out of somebody, their spouse, usually a guy harming a woman. But then the honeymoon phase. I love you so much. I'm always going to change, bringing you, whining and dining and bringing you roses. And suddenly the person on the left here has had the hell beat out of him, being oppressed. Look at all the knapsacks, right? The person is under the illusion or delusion that this is the real person. And if I can just be obedient enough, if I can just keep him happy enough, then will live happily ever after. But the reality is what? This is a fake. They're actually here. It's a tactic. So the perpetrator that harmed you is actually down here for SRA and MK Ultra. They're down here. Now, a way to view this is, think about the chart, going from left to right. See, the further you go right, in terms of character, you're worse. So really, the chart is starting at -1. So we would do -1 to -10 in terms of depth, okay, and length as well. So as we go back to the other chart, I want you to understand that the reason we're spending this time now kind of focusing on how do you create this kind of person who ends up down here, because what is this kind of person able to do? MK Ultra and SRA and Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer and Dennis Rader, BTK killer. That is what they're capable of doing. So now I'm going to try to find, we're going to go back. Not that you need to, but if you have any questions, certainly let me know. And if not, I'm going to go back to, I'll find our chart again. My
Let's keep
apologies,
going.
everybody. Okay, everybody bear with me here.
You're good. This is
Oh,
awesome. Thank you for providing all these visuals for us.
you're more than welcome. Okay, now I'm going to do a song and dance routine while I am looking for oh, I found the chart. There we go.
Darn
So
it, I wanted the song and dance routine.
yeah, well, that's, so we can tell this is right. We're not all that polished, but here we are.
Here we go.
Okay, so with that as background, and again, we'll go for maybe a half hour more. I just wanted to give that as background. We were talking about when somebody goes to jail. Okay, now, and here's the reason why I gave you all that background. The guys that we're going to talk about now, the child on child offense that now you have a wounded child that starts perping on other kids. First, let me ask the audience, let me ask those of you that are listening, right? Because hurt people hurt people. Now we're going to think about hurt people, hurt kids hurt people. That is correct. I mean, hurt kids hurt kids. That is correct. Okay. So if you have a 5-year-old that's been perped on, and he acts out on a child 3-year-old, we all understand that the child needs help. But if a child is perped on, I think I mentioned it before, it is unreasonable to believe that that child is not going to give evidence of trauma. It's going to be one extreme or the other. They're going to start acting out or acting in. The acting in is more difficult for a teacher to see because the child will become withdrawn. The child will start self-injurious behavior, but oftentimes it's going to be hidden. One thing that a teacher could look for is in the summertime, do you see a child consistently wearing long sleeves, especially girls? Okay, why do you think they're wearing long sleeves? Right, probably cutting on their arm. Okay, but if you see indicators of self-harm, that's a red flag. What's happened now, especially with the trans movement, all the 9 key red flag indicators of sexual perpetration, sexual trauma, is being reframed as gender confusion. And where do they send the child? They put them on the moving sidewalk, heading towards sterility or sterilization, and then amputation of their sex organs. It is horrific. That's not how you help a child. A child is not helped by amputating body parts and sterilizing them. They need help on the inside. Well, let's take that child who's been perped on. We know 2 things are probably are going to be clear. There's going to be indicators. Whether or not somebody catches on to them, that's a different issue. But a child will not look well adjusted. They can't. So they won't be well adjusted, and therefore there's probably going to be paper trail on them. Maybe the worst thing, but still, there'll be a drop in grades. There'll be a drop in attendance. Hopefully somebody will notice that, but they're not going to get, all things being, it's very rare, but some SRA survivors are able to do this. But rare is the time they're going to get valedictorian and most likely to succeed. They're not going to be the ones that are running for school um, president and doing the debate team, captain of the sports team. Now, we all know exceptions. But generally speaking, it's going to be really, really rare that a sexual abuse survivor, especially the level that we're talking sadistic abuse, that child is not going to be able to concentrate at school. They're going to have a hard time staying awake. They also then are probably being watched by perpetrators. So they're just trying to keep it together. They're just trying to stay off the radar. Okay. So we're not going to see a survivor look increasingly well adjusted. There's going to be a paper trail, all things being equal. I've worked with kids in the system for years, so trust me, I understand that. So for kids in the system, no kid is placed in residential treatment or in group home the very first time they've ever been removed from the home. Okay, so there's been a growing history. So their file is getting bigger and bigger, bigger. All that to say, now they become age 18 or 19. And let's say with a male, he's now arrested for statutory sexual assault. Now look on the chart up here. Okay. What do we make of that individual? First of all, how much time are they going to be given? And it all depends. What statutory sexual assault? You may have a 18 or a 19-year-old. These are actual scenarios. 18 or 19-year-old that has sex with a 15-year-old. So you could actually have a senior that just turned 18, still in high school. Parents found out, they called the police because their daughter was a freshman or a sophomore. Not often, but that happens. What more times than not, what happens is now the guy graduates. He's 19. He was still dating his girlfriend. He turns 18. Let's say he graduates 18, 19-ish. Parents don't like him, or this guy is ego driven. I had one of these guys in my group. He was just really becoming more egotistical, and the mother was starting to become frustrated because the guy, her daughter was in high school, I think a junior, and he was becoming more possessive, and so it was distracting the daughter. So the mother says, "Hey, you need to start putting boundaries." Well, the guy isn't going to listen to mom, so he starts being manipulative. And mom gets increasingly ticked. And then mom finally has had enough. Guess what mom does? Calls the police. The guy is arrested. He's now technically a sex offender. Now, he didn't do prison time, didn't do jail time. He was arrested, taken down. He's booked, does a mugshot, but he was able to bail out. But the judge, this was in a Midwestern state or maybe a Western state, and they don't fool around sometimes in some of those states. And so he was going to do prison time, but because he had no track record of prior offenses, so first of all, that's how we know this kid wasn't perped on. So his issue in this guy's case, instead of being more of a perpetrator, now he crossed lines. But what is he like some of the guys we're thinking of? No, yank and grab, snatch him, drive a van around the park, stranger danger. No, he was just an idiot who was full of himself, who crossed boundaries. He deserved what he got. But would I worry about him in the future, or was that enough of a wake-up call? And it was. Now, hopefully my group helped. Okay, but in his case, it was ego. But such sexual statutory assault. So he actually didn't do any prison time, or jail time, but he was on parole because he was going to be sent to prison, but in lieu of prison. So he was going to do 2 to 4 times. So statutory assault perpetrated by a guy who wasn't a survivor, I think he got 2 to 4. But in lieu of that time, he was put on parole as long as he didn't violate any of the stipulations and finished sex offender treatment. Okay. The lesser numbers of time is going to match either the offense and the qualitative degree of that, and the judge may order an evaluation, a risk evaluation, and I am able to do those kind of evaluations as well. I don't right now because I don't have the time. What do I look for? I look for all of this, by the way. So you're actually kind of scared looking into my mind of what goes on. So what do we want to know? Here's date rape. Now, how many different kinds of ways have there been date rape? And I'm not excusing any of it, right? I'm all for survivors, but a lot of different kinds. You can have somebody that's way over on the right that does date rape that would only be given a small amount of years. So I'm not suggesting that the people that do these, that this is the category exactly what they're in, but oftentimes you're going to find that somebody who does one of these crimes will fit into pretty much. We could draw a line down, and actually, I will. I'll bring some lines up right now. Okay. As a matter of fact, I'll continue from left to right so you see all these different crimes. Indecent exposure, that's flashing, whatever degree. That is almost unheard of these days. Do you know why? Because most perps, now this guy actually is more deviant than the statutory sexual assault. This guy's actually a concern, but look at the small amount of time they'll typically be given. Now, why did I put these down with these chunks of time? When I was on psych staff, I have access to all the records. This is typically what you will see. Date rape, now it depends upon to what extent and what happened. A lot of circumstances. Okay, but typically it was not uncommon to see college date rape, indecent exposure. Don't ask me if I like this, but the judge has a sentence structure. They can sentence them from this to this. You can either go before a judge or do a jury trial. No sex offender wants to go to jury trial. Why? Because then suddenly you're looking at 5 to 10, even way up there. And that's why guys will take plea deals. And what people need to know, by the way, is these do not necessarily represent. So these are what the person is convicted of. That's different than being charged. So you can be charged with a lot of stuff. Now, for instance, there are people, I'm going to use a different category. For instance, I was a whistleblower for against the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, and the prison system charged me with forgery. Gosh, what a joke. Judge threw it out. Okay, so just because you're charged with something doesn't mean you're guilty of it. So I just want to, right there, there's a lot of different false charges. So anybody can be charged with anything. Now, let me get back to the sex offender thing. Okay, if anybody wants to read about that scenario, by the way, you go to churchprotect.org under the Insights tab. And the very first tab is when called to do hard things. You'll hear my story. So I was the first psych staff to blow the whistle, at least in the US, on inmate abuse. And one of those was a quote unquote trans inmate that I protected. Okay. Now, getting back to sex offenses, inevitably what you're going to find is this. What the guy's doing time for, what he was convicted of, is much less than really what he did. Okay, and so the guys count on perpetrators count on the public not understanding that, because then if let's say, what do we want to call it, statutory sexual assault, you can even have, as a matter of fact, I have 3 guys in my sex offender treatment groups between among the 5 of them that have on paper, they call it on paper, on their record, they have no sex assault. It's just second degree assault. Why are they in sex offender treatment? Because they did some of this stuff and they were able to take a plea deal. Why do they do that? Because in the overall system, it doesn't clog up the court system. Don't ask me that, whether or not I like this. Okay, so what goes on, and what's sad is a lot of victims are not even consulted. Now, if you have a good DA, he should consult the victim, but they do what I call horse trading. So some guy has X number of counts of, they'll just load him up, and he's looking at 5,000 years in prison. Or you can take a plea deal, and we'll give you 1 count of statutory sexual assault, and you will go to prison for 2 to 4 years. So either you take it to court and you run the risk, and here's all those charges, or we will allow you, we're going to kind of horse trade away. Again, don't ask me if I like this. Horse trade away all these counts, and you agree to this, agree to plead guilty to this, and we'll call it a day, and you'll just go in front of the judge and he'll sentence you. And it's up to the judge then. It could have been 4 to 8, and he gave him 2 to 4. So the statute might say for that particular crime, anywhere between 2 to 5, and the judge can sentence him. There's judicial discretion. Okay, so what I would tend to see on psych staff in the different, what are called sentence structures, and the charges and the time they were doing, and it's typically in these combinations. This is very typical in prison, 2 to 4, 4 to 8, kind of in there. So inevitably, you're going to see inmates that have these sort of numbers. It's rare to see somebody 4 to 12 or 4 to 9. So these are kind of how it breaks out. So oftentimes for sex offenses, this is sort of the grouping. So you'd have indecent exposure. Now, why is this getting less? Because sex offenders are catching on that they can do indecent exposure and not get arrested. They simply identify as a woman and go into female or children's spaces. And they can be naked. Oh, Leah Thomas, the swimmer in Penn State. How about right now? Planet Fitness is losing stock value. Why? Because they're permitting self-identifying men in the women's lockers and shower area. If you're familiar with the Wee Spa incident, what happens? A man walks in, says he identifies as a woman, and he disrobes, he gets an erection, goes into the shower, and a woman starts going crazy, like, what are you doing? And so the gal walked out and she filmed it, right, as far as her exchange with the guy at the counter. Okay. And it turns out that the guy has a history. He's a convicted sex offender. Shocking. So the trans movement is a sexual predator's best friend. So if you can, here we go. If you can identify as a woman, you can't get charged with indecent exposure. It's diabolical. That's why we need to be really concerned about this whole thing. Okay, so no guy should be in a woman's or child's private space. Okay, if a guy wants to be a deviant, then you go to where deviant males go, but you don't be around children or women. Okay, IDSI, involuntary deviant sexual intercourse. So the difference is this: statutory sexual assault. This is somebody over the age of, 13. The demarcation is pretty much 13. So usually it's 14. So think about high school or younger. Now the question is this: what are you talking about? Why would this get less time than this? There are certain situations where, so they were just entering into high school, and let's say the guy was age 17. So, or charged as an adult, but because of the age. So now you have like an eighth grader and maybe a sophomore or a junior. Now, don't think I'm in agreement, meaning these guys a perp. Absolutely is. But that's how in state prison we're going to see that. Okay, rape of an adult. Usually that's going to, or often you're going to have coercion. Well, you're either going to have a date rape situation. So sometimes they'll actually, they have multiple counts. Um, Coercion, some sort of force. So by degree, that will typically, if a guy's in for rape, you're going to tend to see 4 to 8 or 5 to 10. Now, of course, what probably came to mind for people is, wait, you can have rapes where they did horrible, horrible things. There's kidnapping. So yes, okay. But I just want you to say, depending upon a situation, um, so technically it's rape, but depending upon situation or circumstances, ideally that's where a judge is supposed to come in and discern all this. Where are we next? Aggravated rape of a child, depending upon age. But I just want you to see, again, what we would tend to see in their file or what's called in their jacket. Now, what's interesting and important is this. See bestiality up there, cruelty to animals. The reason why it's really important, because people say, well, Jon, how many did you have? That's the important thing. So right up here. It's rare that you're going to see somebody arrested for bestiality. But when I ask you, where is it? Down here. See where I am under categories of porn? Drop down here, right? That kind of whatever color that is, pinkish. Okay. See bestiality? Inevitably, somebody that's into bestiality is accessing that same kind of porn. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Garbage in, garbage out. You are going to be able to see a corresponding relationship. There's a correlation between the kind of perpetration a guy is doing and what he is filling his mind with. So if a guy, for instance, if a guy is looking at, okay, watch the cursor down here. If he's looking at, how about right here? See AGP, autogonophilia? We could also put it down here, fetishistic. Always challenge for me to say that, like fetish, which is really just deviance. Ever heard of guys dressing up in diapers? Or pup play? What do you think they're looking at? Thank you very much. Guy that's into pup play, what do you think he's accessing? Yep. If somebody is dressing up like an infant, a deviant guy, what do you think he's accessing? Right? Look at that category of stuff. That's why these perps are just laughing all the way to the bank that they can take pictures of themselves in the women's washroom, or they're out in public dressing as babies or pups. They know right now that the public doesn't see this connection. Right? That if we take this category, if everybody can see the little blue dots that I'm trying, where'd they go? Right? We're now going to kind of show the categories. Okay, look at what they're into. And here's the important thing. By the time they're busted, so If a guy gets into this kind of pornography down here, how soon will he get busted? Depends upon how smart he is. He may never get busted, and therefore he may run for political office. He may become a pastor. And this leads to this, and leads to this. How about mort porn? That's a new term, mortuary porn, which means what? You're having sex with dead bodies. Okay. It used to be called necrophilia. Okay. By the way, zoophiles, do I have that down here? Fancy little term, zoophilia is bestiality being rebranded. So inevitably what you're going to find is as a guy moves from left to right with all of this, you'll be able to match the porn. And in sex offender treatment, unfortunately, most providers don't understand this. And once a guy understands that you understand this, and you let him know that he'd better start talking, it better make sense. Because if he's got, I'm going to go back up here now to the crimes. If he's got some of these, I can't even do that. Oh, there we go. If he's got some of these kind of crimes, or not even that necessarily, but really think about, indecent exposure. Because, as a matter of fact, here's one. Look at indecent exposure right there. You need to know this. If a guy is doing indecent exposure down deep inside, so the one thing about these crimes is this is the only thing on the chart that doesn't necessarily fit into these categories. So my apologies. But you can be guaranteed that if a guy does get busted for one of these crimes, he at least is into these categories. The reality is, by the time a guy gets busted for a sex offense, he is down here. Okay. I don't know if you can see that, right? Here's the cursor right here. Okay. He's already, think about what he's been accessing. Kink, BDSM, he's already there. So we could take this, we're moving it in here. But secretly, if he's into kink and BDSM and sissy porn, he's already watching rape fantasies. He's starting to look at AGP crap, and he's looking at child porn, but it hasn't been busted for it. By the time a man has become deviant enough to act stuff out, and I don't even like that term, meaning he's going to be driven to do it. So by the time he does it, then he gets busted. He may be charged for the lesser crimes he does, or he was charged up here, he took a plea deal. So the amount of time he does in prison is not reflective of where he is in the degree of psychopathy. And what's so dangerous these days, in my estimation, about those that are supposedly trained in doing risk evaluations is they don't take into account and they actually minimize pornography, which makes them incapable because the evaluator needs to have this understanding that if some guy is into sadistic porn, bestiality, and by the way, bestiality will always come in a way before child porn. Now, why did I put it over here? Because it's kind of all, it's fluid in here, so to speak. Okay, but by the time somebody's into bestiality, you can be guaranteed they are accessing child porn. But that's the thing that most people don't understand. They think that bestiality is like way off the charts. Oh, what happened here? I don't know what I just did. Oh, well. Okay. Well, I'll have to figure that out. So behind that is the bestiality. I have no idea what I just did. Okay. So you can see go figure, huh? I don't know. Maybe can I undo? Oh, there it goes. Okay, it's back now. Go figure. So the important thing to recognize right out of the gate when we're talking about men who've offended is by the time they've been busted, they have spent thousands of hours in progressive pornography, and they're inevitably down over, if you can see the cursor again, down here. Okay. So if you see a guy into kink and BDSM and sissy porn publicly, I'm going to tell you, he's probably accessing stuff at least way over here. Okay. And there's a term called barely legal. Was it over here? Yeah. That simply means they're looking at young teenagers. So if a guy's heavily into fetishes, think about Sam Brinton. He was a cross-dressing AGP. He's the former Undersecretary of Nuclear Waste and Department of Energy under the Biden administration. He used to work for the Trevor Project, which is perfect for grooming and recruiting and trafficking kids, by the way. I've done a number of videos on him. He was really deviant. He's the one that stole the women's underwear or clothes from different luggage from different airports. And why was he doing that? To gain access to the clothing and the underwear they never found. The underwear they never found. Yeah, they never found the underwear. Why? He was masturbating in it. By the time a man thinks it's a reasonable proposition to wear women's underwear, guess what he's been accessing? And the question is, where do you get the underwear? The majority of them steal them. Very dangerous at that point. Yet who's being allowed into private spaces in um, in gyms, in pools, in on girls' sports? Guys that want on to girls' sports, they don't care about beating the girls. Why are they doing it? That's just preliminary heat, so to speak. That's just hors d'oeuvres. They like to deny women. Why? Because pornography creates an increasing degree of malevolence. I want you to see, we're going to go down here for a second, if I can see it. Go down with me. There, down here. Okay, there's a growing degree of malevolence. That means they love to see harm. Why do you think a man, I'm going to go back up for a moment. Okay, when you see a man who thinks it's a reasonable proposition to put his hand around the throat of a female, he is malevolent. How did he get that way? He went way beyond kink by that time. Anybody that's at kink is not stopping at kink, not stopping at BDSM. And some guy that's into detective and these kind of shows, trust me, he's a really scary individual. How can I say that? Because when I was heading up one of Pennsylvania's two specialized forensic treatment units, 65-bed inpatient unit for sexually violent predators, it was unbelievable to me. But the guys had access to the library. They could order library books. They were brought to them because this was a sort of a contained residential treatment program. How many of the guys were ordering from the library detective films? I walked by one guy, and he's got what looked like a Harlequin romance, a thick book like that. And I'm walking by. They live in cubicles, kind of two man to a cubicle, the kind of cubicles that are in an office space that are about 4 feet high. So the officer's platform is raised and he can look out over all the cubicles. So all these perps are behaving themselves and they have their own little cubicles, two men. And so I walk by and you can just glance over and see what everybody's doing. And I see this guy reading and I look at the book and the cover of it shows a man's hand submerging, pushing down a woman's head into a bathtub, and she's obviously struggling. And I looked at that. Now, this is on a program for sexually violent predators. What's wrong with this picture, by the way? Okay. And I did what I could to change some treatment and add more. It was unbelievable, but apparently they have constitutional rights to, it's so schizophrenic. Okay. But I asked him what he was doing. He says, "Oh, he's reading." I said, "Oh, it's very interesting." He says, "Oh, I'm really interested in detective movies or detective stories." Okay. And that fits with what Robert Harris says, by the way, that from his perspective, psychopaths will really have an interest in law enforcement and psychology. Okay, but I think they have an interest in a lot of other things. But there you go. There would be an example of that. So, ladies, be very mindful. If a guy is, right, hopefully you're starting to see, should you ever date a guy that's into pornography? No, because what he's going to tell you about, what he's going to show you is nothing compared to really what's under the surface. And by the time they're doing the extreme end, they've already gone through these different stages. Okay, I'm aware of how long I've been talking, but hopefully as we move our way through, I'll come back to some of the, well, you see ritual abuse. Now that's been recently added. So I called it ritualistic abuse because we had a number of guys. We didn't call it ritualistic abuse, but the state of Utah now has that category. But again, ritualistic abuse is the systematic and consistent abuse of someone. And then now it's really adding the idea of objects. So they would have added, for instance, those terms would be rape, aggravated assault. So they would add different offenses to that to get to that. But now ritualistic abuse, um, it now uses that term. So I put that there because again, a guy would plead all these things down. So it is rare that you actually see a guy that was sentenced to 25 to 50 years. I have one of my guys right now, as a matter of fact, in the Tuesday night group I did tonight, was serving 50, no, 25 to life. And he had perped on a teenage boy. And he was the first person that was released after the 25 years, but he thought he was going to do life. I have another guy that in my group that did 40 years in prison. So it's rare to see those large chunks of time in sex offender treatment. Because you can imagine they're not going to take sex offender treatment until prior to getting out. Does that mean that guys doing 50 to life and life don't do sex offenses? Of course they do, and that's why I put them over on the right side. But typically in sex offender treatment, you're going to see these kinds of people. Some guy doing life is typically not going to take sex offender treatment because the people that take it are the ones that are going to get out, have to take it in order to get out. So you're typically not going to see your lifers. You're just not. They're not going to take that kind of programming. The difference between life and natural life, by the way, in prison terms, sometimes you'll hear that. Life with the possibility of parole. Natural life means life without the possibility of parole. Okay, we're now going to look at least one other thing. Let's go back to the degree of conscience, and then we'll wrap it up for tonight. And we'll do I'll scroll down. We'll do one more little review. This is the key to everything. Conscience, understanding somebody's conscience and where they're at is the key to understanding what they've done. So as I mentioned, for SRA and MK Ultra, we're talking people who have harmed to the greatest degree. Now I'm going to do the disappearing pen. Okay. So SRA and MK Ultra, and I'll change the colored pen. Okay, people at that level. I'm going to change it to white just so we can see it. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to have disappearing pens here. Let me do, that should be disappearing, vanishing pen. Okay. Okay, so SRA, MK Ultra, sadistic stuff, right over here. Okay. So again, there's a category. By the time somebody gets into that, they are this bad. If they got busted, and for all the survivors out there, you need to understand what they have done would get them what in prison? Why do you think they worked so hard to make sure you would never disclose? Because they don't want to go to prison. Did they ever do indecent exposure? Did they ever pull down their pants and show you their penis? Yep. Did they ever, quote unquote, have sex with you, which is not sex, by the way, when you were 13 and older? Yep. How about when you were under the age of 13? Of course, all the time. Some of you, when you were older, what did they do? Yep. Did some people connected with that? Did they take you on a date? Did they rape you? Yep. Did they ever use, here's the definition, did they ever use an item on you? Did they ever put something up inside you? Yep. Did they ever force you to do something with an animal? Yep. Did you ever see, did they do this to you, or did you ever see them draw blood as they were raping you or somebody else? Did you ever see them or were you made to see where they did something to a corpse? Yep. Did they ever take pictures of you naked and being raped? Yep. Did they ever have those? Correct. Did they ever pass those along? Correct. Did they ever transport you to where people or allow people to rape you? Correct. Did they consistently and in an increasingly abusive way, because they had access to you, and including use of objects, did they use you on a consistent basis? Correct. Did they ever take you and you didn't want to go? Yes. And that was one night for some of you. Should we add up the numbers? Just start adding up the numbers. This category would have gotten them what? 20 to 50 for each count. And we've got what is this one? 10 to 20? We got some of that. You add up all these numbers, and okay, they're not going to be given life. They might. They'll be given 200 to 500 years behind bars, which is, in essence, what? The people that did this to you did all of this, not just one night, just not 1 week. Is there a satanic calendar? Uh-huh. What do they do on those quote unquote high holy days? All that. So how many times a day, a week, a month, a year did they do all of this? I'll tell you what, one ritual, according to the calendar, how about St. Patrick's Day? How about St. Walpurgis Day? February 2nd, right there, all in one fell swoop. Why do you think they don't want you to disclose? That's why you need to see the people that did this to you did it to you because what kind of pornography were they saturating themselves in? Before they ever touched you, they were accessing what kind of porn, and including what they did to you that added to their list of pornography, right? And therefore, they did this because, now I'm going to move the page down in ending, they were given over to evil. And they were psychopathic. We're going to go down a little further. They were in the far right, and they wanted to secure, and they ensured, or they wanted to ensure your compliance and silence. So on the inside, this is what they did because they were the worst kind of criminals, and they don't want to go to prison. And that's why, for you and the little ones and your core person, you need to see that it wasn't about you, and that's how evil they were. Let me quickly just go over this real fast, and then we'll end. We'll go back over this, but I want you to see the difference between the Jeffrey Dahmers, the Ted Bundys, versus SRA and MK Ultra. Again, left to right. We'll go over this a little bit, but you could take a screenshot, write this, just kind of just kind of ponder this during the week between now and when we do the next program. But it all starts with low-level porn, with lust, a guy's getting into lust. And remember, it moves from left to right. But there comes a point where you will see a divergence depending upon the kind of person. If a person is more impulsive driven, you're going to see that he starts to go down a different kind of path. And this is going to be ultimately your serial rapist and murderer. Okay. And you notice I put ritualistic and ritualistic. Okay. These are the serial rapists and murderers that we hear about. These are the guys that make the paper. These are the ones that make the upper echelons of the Masons and the, politics and the movers and the shakers. The difference is the degree of sophistication, which matches the degree of planning. There's a degree of planning with each of these. And then you have a degree of intensity, which is going to match. There's going to be a similar degree of intensity, but it's going to fuel things that look differently. So this is the individual serial rapist and murderer, this track. This is the sadistic group that are very what? Strategic. First, you can see it. They're pragmatic, manipulative. Both have to be manipulative, but the guy that's reactive doesn't have to be as manipulative. Why? Because he's going to be more erratic. He's going to be snatch and grab. Let's see, it becomes calculating, strategic, tactical, methodical, precision. The guy up here is not precise. That's why eventually he's going to get busted. Both will become ritualistic in their own way. BTK killer, Dennis Rader, talked about the ritual, how he would start, and that's where the buildup would come in. He would start to cruise around the neighborhood, and he would pick an intended target, and there was a buildup for him. And Factor X would start to talk to him. Okay, that's a demon, by the way. Okay, but there's a buildup, but it's going to be shown differently. It's going to manifest differently. But for the calculated one, so this is the MK Ultra and SRA. Okay, malevolent, cold-blooded, and diabolical. Okay, again, apples and oranges, but the same, still harming to the nth degree. Okay, and then as we go down again, did I put the psychopath and the sociopath? Okay, I've probably given people enough to think through. Emma, I'm going to stop this now. I didn't really intend to go in, but it probably needed, right? Since I had that one section on the offenses. So hopefully it wasn't too dry, but it was probably important for everybody to see since it was up there to begin to understand. So the takeaway is this. If someone does time for a sex offense, generally speaking, they're worse than they are. They took plea deals. They're into worse stuff. So if somebody only does 2 to 4, it doesn't mean they didn't deserve 25 to 50, give or take. But it also means, let's say for certain guys that were sentenced to 2 to 4, it also doesn't mean that they are perpetrators like SRA. I throw that out. That'll be for another discussion. Right? So it's important to differentiate the term sex offender because there's about 8 different categories that I have laid out. But the important thing for the survivor is to understand this. Just because somebody has not been charged with a sex offense doesn't mean that they're not perpetrating sex offenses. They just haven't been busted yet. So the AGP guys, the guys that are dressing in women's underwear and drag and strutting their stuff around, the guys that are going into Planet Fitness right now, every single guy that's going into a female washroom is heavily saturated in porn and is on from the middle to the right, and probably 3/4 already to the right. He's a very dangerous individual. This is a public safety issue. There should never be any guy on a female athletic team. Why? Because all those guys are demanding what? It goes hand in hand into their changing rooms and the shower rooms. These are very dangerous individuals. Why? Because they're dressing in women's underwear as well. The question is this: where to get the women's underwear? You think he purchased them, didn't you? He didn't purchase them. He stole them. He says he didn't. Oh, okay. So you're going to listen to a deviant guy? No, he stole them. Sam Britton, don't think the Undersecretary of Energy of spent nuclear waste. How much was his salary? I don't know. 6 figures. What, he couldn't afford clothes? Why was he stealing women's underwear? And why were the items not found? Because he masturbated in all the underwear. Why? He's deviant. Why? Because he's wearing women's underwear. Why? Because he's dressing in drag. Why? Because he saturated his mind in the category on the right, that kind of porn. He was into very dangerous stuff. That's why he defended what was called Rent Boy magazine. Rent boys is a term that's used for young male prostitutes in Amsterdam, a lot of whom come from London. These are very deviant individuals. And what happens to the kids in Amsterdam? They get trafficked, and then what? SRA. or get chopped up, little body parts. We're talking heinous stuff, and the perps are laughing all the way to the bank. This is a public safety issue. The trans deception is a public safety issue because who is jamming it down everybody's throat? It's these sexually deviant guys and the financial predators that now that WPATH has finally been unmasked, it wasn't hard to figure that out, right? That as a financial fraud, slicing, dicing these kids and sterilizing them with all the puberty blockers. Okay. But the sexual deviants have used the trans movement to get their hands on these kids. So every guy that is demanding access into a woman's private space and swim team, that's how they get in the private space. I want everybody to understand, guess what category of porn he's into? Scale of 1 to 10, he's into the 7, 8s, 9s, and 10s already. And he's walking in, undressing next to who? What do you think he's doing with his cell phone camera? It's a really serious thing. So for public safety, there should never, ever be men in women's spaces. If they're trying to access women and children, they're doing so for a reason. And all the sex offenders know this. They can't believe it. So why aren't guys getting arrested for exhibitionism any longer? Because now all they have to do is say what? They identify with a female, and now they can go be an exhibitionist. How? Strutting their stuff, walking around Planet Fitness in the locker room. And Planet Fitness says they welcome everyone. Judgment-free zone. Well, that's special. That's why their stock is dropping. They better start having judgment instead of poor judgment or zero. So there we go. Emma will continue. Hopefully this has been helpful for folks, again, to understand who it is that would harm a child in a ritualistic way, or MK Ultra. So whether they whether they put on satanic robes or a lab coat or a three-piece suit, they're on the right. And they never intended to do anything other than they did. And all those categories of men are into those categories of porn prior to harming kids. And that's who caused this harm. So all the young ones on the inside and those that are protective really need to understand that those are the bad guys, not the parts that are trying to disclose.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. That is really eye-opening, and it makes so much sense to see how you compared the offenses or the outward appearances or the qualities of certain people, whether they're wearing, diapers and bankies or dressing like women, and like how that associates with what they're doing behind the scenes. Like they're literally living out their fetishes and fantasies and the, I guess, illegal activity in a lot of these cases that they're doing.
That's part of fun, right? Am I right? Because a psychopath is always all about having a negative effect and game theory. So they love taunting and they love putting it out there in people's faces and playing people for fools so that people don't catch on. That's part of the thrill of the hunt for them. So secretly, and that's why, for instance, and then we'll close. When you go online anywhere on Google or whatever, and you see somebody taking a picture of themselves, somebody that's dressed as the opposite sex, opposite gender, and they post it. So now you either have a girl that's now dressing up as a boy, so she's going into the men's room, or you have a guy dressing up as a girl, and he goes into the women's room. What percentage do we see online of men dressed as women taking a picture of themselves in the women's room versus how many girls dressed as boys taking a picture of themselves, or a man dressed in the men's room taking a picture of themselves?
You see tons more of the first than the latter.
It's almost 99%. I've never seen a female who is, quote unquote, cross-gender, meaning dressing as a man. I've never once, maybe it's out there. If somebody has found it, okay, good for you, and send it to me. I'll be happy to see it. Meaning just, okay, you're right. We found one. Okay. I just have never seen a woman who goes through any sort of social change or medical change, sex change, who now thinks she passes, who goes into the men's room and takes a picture. Typically, what you're going to see that woman is she's in her own home. And the most brazen is she's taking a picture, or she's in some sort of studio, but she's taking a picture of herself. She doesn't have any top on, but we see the scars. I've never once seen that woman go into a men's room and take a picture. And the question is, then why is it always guys? Because guys have crossed the boundary. They have achieved it. Achieved what? The violation of sacred space. And women can't do anything about it. I mean, think about the psychopathic mind. They're rubbing it in the face of the public, but also of those women that we're in your face, you can't do anything about it. It's a trophy picture. Well, same thing about underwear. That's trophy. Any guy that's in there, any guy that wants to be on women's sports team, is a predator. And how many young men now in high school, how many young teens are wanting to get on girls' teams? They become teenage predators. That's all this is. So we need to help protect women and children from this. So that's part of the reason why looking at those degrees of porn.
Thank you so much, Jon. I really appreciate you. This is a really eye-opening deep dive, and I look forward to sort of digging deeper and getting into those lower layers of all of this that you've helped design, and also to see what you keep adding to it. I know it's a work in progress still, which is really cool. So I appreciate you putting this together. Man, I wish this was stuff that we were taught in school. I try to think like, gosh, if I had a class and a teacher like you who taught me all of this stuff, and that was what I learned for a whole year, an hour every day of this, like we'd be so equipped to go out in the real world and like just like that as a child, no matter what age, we'd be so equipped to handle warding off abuse and trauma, and just to think about how they don't even focus on any of this is really crazy. So thank you, as from one adult to another, like I wish I would have learned this stuff whenever I was younger. I'm sure a lot of other people would have too, but what a great time and day that we live in to where we can get educated on this, it's never too late. So I appreciate you putting all this together. I know that's a lot of work for you on top of all the other work that you do to put these charts together and to compile all this, 30 years of information into these short time periods for us. So really well done, Jon. This is really awesome what you're doing. You're pioneering such a neat pathway for yourself and for your community on the therapist end, and also for the survivor community who 100% supports you and loves you. So let's show people to you where they can find you online, because series is just one of the many things that you do, and you've given a lot of free hours of your time to this podcast and the series, but you also have, I would say, hundreds of hours, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure you have hundreds of hours, free hours, between your podcast and between survivor support videos that you've done that are just there for free. So let's talk about where people can find you and about all the other projects that you do.
There we go. We'll start with the main site. That's SurvivorSupport.net. And that is for those that are wondering if they are survivors or have been abused, those that have pretty much come to the conclusion that they have, or those that know. So this is an adjunct to therapy, or help someone ponder, to have enough information, or for those that want to become educated to more meaningfully assist and help and support those that are survivors, hence survivor support. I invite clergy to spend time on this. Best way to use this is moving from left to right. Yeah, that's right. I got a lot of different things. Our series, by the way, if anybody wants, we've got Emma's channel, so the Imagination Station, or you can go to the third tab over, Help for the Journey, go down to the fourth tab, the Impact Trauma, and you will see I have compiled these. I guess I've done 5 of these. So that's a good way. And that's a poem, by the way, of a survivor. But if you scroll down just a little bit more, you will then see, there you go. So it'll load. There's the chart. So, and we will come back to that. I don't want people to lose heart. I know this is kind of a difficult topic, but there they are. So, and then there's about IFS as well, and a lot of videos. So there's a lot of information on there. So, well, and then my podcast that I do on Friday nights is under the podcast, or yeah, my podcast is under the podcast tab. That's a repository of past programs. I'm currently doing one on forgiveness, what it is versus what it is not. And then there's also many hours worth on boundaries. So there's a good repository there.
So many hours, just never.
Now, I'm telling you, there's a lot of hours. This will help your therapy. I'm almost willing to say if you go through this, well, yeah, it'll decrease the amount of therapy you need. Okay. The next site is more of a research kind of site. That is churchprotect.org. And under the Truths tab, that is where you're going to find my past work or things about my past work, including emails, if you want to find out the feedback I got from the highest levels of the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections in the mental health or psychology or psychiatry department. You'll see that there. And then this feedback that I've received from different people. But then going up top, so there's a lot of information on how best to research predators. And then under the insights, I had to split it out. I got too big apparently. So Insights 2024, you'll see what I do on social media. I can't capture everything. It just gets too time consuming. And then, by the way, the very first one, as you click on that one, I'm sorry, there you go, regular insights. If you want to read about my whistleblowing experience, that gives that background. But if you want to keep up on what I do on social media, just the regular insights and a lot of links to different stories. And I try to prompt thought, so I give little bite-sized nuggets. And then the other site would be Unmasking the Trans Movement and .com. So just so there are three different, you got survivor.net, churchprotect.org, and then unmaskingtransmovement.com. And hopefully now people can understand from what I've even said just a little bit ago, why it's important to unmask the trans movement, because financial and sexual predators are having their way with kids. So there's a lot of information on here, a lot of 30-minute episodes. And I also have those episodes on YouTube under the same title. There's no space though. I guess it does verbally, but you can see in the actual title there. So Unmasking the Trans Movement. I just put part 1 up there. Maybe it doesn't show that, but I've added another one with Pierre Barnes, who is a great resource allowing parents to go into their school library real time to find out what books. So Pierre has done a synopsis of all these sexually deviant books, and then you can find out, are any of those books in real time in the library, in your child's library. He certainly has covered all of Canada, every single elementary school and high school. I think he's doing so in the US as well. And then there is my YouTube, which I forget my name. What do I have on there? Oh, Jon K. Uhler, LPC. And you'll see everything I publish is put on there. So there's not really a rhyme or reason from this, but if you go under playlists, I've tried to separate those out. What are the categories that I have? So there we are, Emma. There's healing. So I guess now I'll figure out what repository I'm going to put these on. So that helps organize it. You see the Journey to Healing ones there as well. And then have I left anything out? On my blog is SurvivorSupport.us. You can get through that either through this website or just simply typing in SurvivorSupport.us. And that'll take you to the blog. So there's 2 ways to get to that. Is that it? I think I've covered it.
You
And
forgot your
so
Twitter again.
there's something. Oh, on Twitter, that's right. So under the blog, there's some things on the trans movement, a lot of things about predators. So I'd recommend spend some time on that if you want to learn about the characteristics of predators. And sometimes you'll have to keep clicking. I forget how many posts. I haven't done any recently, but there's important ones on there. And then Twitter. So those are the different places people can find me, so to speak.
And Jon's Twitter, I say this every time, but go follow him, you guys. It's awesome to be able to keep up with people who are accessible and who sort of give a daily overview on what's, I guess, shaking in the news with these different topics. Jon does one podcast a week with us, which is awesome. We get hours of him. But he posts every single day on Twitter, so you guys can keep up with the latest articles, the latest scandals, also the latest Twitter trolls that come after Jon, which can be quite funny because people don't realize what a warrior Jon is, and you guys get to see a cool side of him on there. He definitely doesn't stand for any bullying, doesn't stand for any deviance on here, and he's very quick to call people out, just like how he is here on the podcast, which is awesome. So he's an awesome ally to survivors. He's so loud with using his voice on every platform he's on. And you guys can keep up with him and what he's doing, what podcast he's going to be on this week, what articles are out that support the work and research that he's doing, and just keeping up with, what he's doing every day and posting and publishing to all of his other sites that he just went over with you guys. So please go keep up with him on Twitter if you're on there. It's an awesome community. Share his stuff, get his work in front of more people, and let people know that we have eyes on him. It's awesome to see Jon's followers climbing on all these platforms. We need to have our eyes on these amazing warriors out here fighting on the front lines, and just clicking and supporting and following can be a really huge thing for creators, even though it might not seem like anything to you. So please go follow him. Please go to Survivor Support, go to Church Protect, go to Unmasking the Trans Movement, his YouTube channels. Literally, I would say hundreds of hours on there, and you guys can literally get basically some free, 101 therapy, where you're kind of learning really deep lessons about things like forgiveness, that are a little bit easy or less challenging to do at home, than maybe some other things that you have to go to a therapist's office to sort of research and understand. Forgiveness is a really deep topic, and he has a ton of hours on there. You guys can study at home, on your off times of doing therapy. Also a great adjunct to send to people in your life who might be dealing with hard times. I love just the playlist that I've done with Jon. Like I said in the intro, I have been sending that as a resource to survivors who reach out and say, oh my gosh, I'm really overwhelmed. I'm just getting started. What can I do? And I've just sending them his playlist, and his blog is another awesome resource that I've been sending and posting, and promoting. Lots of great information on there for people who are newer or seasoned and who want to sort of dig deeper in their own time. And he's put a lot of work into all of this, you guys. So please go connect with him. And his YouTube channels are fantastic. He's constantly updating those. All of his interviews he's doing with other people, he's publishing there all in one spot for you guys. So please go keep up with him. Jon's just an absolute warrior, and somebody who's truly out there to set the captives free, when there's a lot of people who are choosing to look away or ignore it, or simply just continue to be ignorant. He's been the one that's been digging deeper into all of this, questioning himself, questioning what he's been taught, and being able to come up 30 years, of research, of him opening up his mind to potentials in this world that weren't yet published or really dug into until people like him started doing it. So Jon's truly a pioneer and deserves our support. And Jon, thank you so much again for doing this series and for spending, time. I know it's really late where you're at. And you so generously give us your time and your energy. I know you had a long day, and you'd think it was the first thing that you did first thing in the morning was do this. You always show up nice and fresh and with energy. So we really appreciate you and the information that you share.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. And again, I commend you. And your channel, I can't recommend it enough. Obviously, people are watching this, they're either watching it on your channel or an abbreviated version. So I'm putting abbreviated versions of this on mine. So I want to encourage people to go to your channel, subscribe to it, and visit all the different formats. You're all over the place as far as all these different outlets, so to speak. So you're doing a wonderful job on behalf of survivors.
Thank you, Jon. It takes a village, we're all in this together. So it's an honor to be here with you, and awesome to share all this information. And I know you guys, once again, I know on the other side are getting a lot of value. I don't ever ask for anything, I just ask you guys share. That's a really great, people always like, what can I do? Share the episode, just go post it on your social media or share it with one friend. That's a really big thing that you can do to help support. And it means a lot to me. And it's a lot bigger of a gesture than you know. So if I could ask for anything, go share this with one friend today. Go share it with one person that you care about. Go post it on one social media channel. Takes no time and, might save a life. So again, Jon, thank you so much for being here. You guys, thank you so much for supporting. We can't do this without you. Go support us in the show notes. Everything is a hyperlink. You just go down, click, take you right to the website. You guys can go subscribe, check out, support, all of those good things. Go please support us on all different platforms. And we appreciate you guys. So thank you guys so much for listening. God bless you. And we will see you next time.
It's not every day that you walk into a whole family brutally executed.
It was such a bizarre case. It wasn't normal at all.
The elements of this case are